mass production of abusive images of women and of children. In one 24-hour stretch, in the first week of January, there were 166,000 abusive images created on Grok. It is abuse on an absolutely industrial scale, to which Elon Musk, the owner of X, originally responded with laughing faces. When he came under sufficient pressure, he said, okay, now it'll only be available, this nudification feature will only be available to those who pay. So instead of stopping the abuse, instead they're making money out of the abuse. It's obviously horrific what is taking place. And the Irish government can't close their eyes to it. They can't play the job of hear no evil, see no evil. It's very obvious what is taking place. The question is whether the Irish government is now going to stand up to big tech and stand up to Elon Musk, or allow this abuse to continue, given Ireland's central role as the key data protection regulator in terms of the European Union. It is, without a doubt, the case that the child abusive images that are being created on X by Grok are illegal. They violate the child pornography legislation very, very clearly. So the Irish state needs to act. Musk, X need to be prosecuted for the production of this abuse. Where there may be a certain grey area is in relation to the production of abusive images of women which are not fully nude images. It's arguable that that is illegal as it currently stands, but a case may be made that there's a certain grey area there. That's a grey area that can be closed down overnight with a very simple amendment to legislation, which we're going to be bringing forward later this week. But the fundamental question here is a question of political will. Is the government going to stand up for women, for children, for those who are facing this image-based abuse and sexual violence, or is the government going to kowtow to big tech? And in reality, we're hearing mixed signals from the government. So the Taoiseach on the one hand says there's no obstacles to any prosecution of X, fine, welcome, then let's see the prosecutions. But on the other hand, the minister responsible, Paschal Donohoe, puts the blame only on the individuals who are producing these images, saying it's not Grok, which is the machinery being used to generate these images, which is obviously wrong. I'm on the AI committee. I wrote to the AI committee last week seeking that we have an urgent meeting, that we invite in X, we invite in the AI minister, we invite in experts and prioritise this at the top of our work when we come back next week. Secondly, on a related issue, in terms of these data centres where this imagery is and abuse is created, the government is gone back to its previous position of saying we want as many data centres as is possible. We'll do anything for these big tech companies, even though they create very, very few jobs, even though they are driving up electricity for ordinary people, even though they are standing in the way, and senior civil servants have said this, standing in the way of the delivery of the housing that we need. We're going to prioritise these data centres. We're going to reopen the flood of data centres in Dublin and throughout the rest of the country. It's already the case that the data centres use more electricity, not just in all the urban households combined, not just in all the rural households combined, but they're nearly at the stage of using more electricity than all the households, both urban and rural, throughout the state. We're on a trajectory of 30% plus, and it is absolute madness. It obviously ties in very well with the abandonment by Darragh O'Brien just after Christmas of the climate targets, these legally binding climate targets, which the government up until very recently has been paying lip service to completing. I remember asking Niamh Smith, the AI minister, do you think there's a contradiction between the government's climate targets and this commitment for more and more data centres? And she said, I went back and checked the answer, no, there's no commitment, we'll be able to do both. Whereas now it's clear the government has put up the white flag in terms of achieving our climate targets. This is the job that Darragh O'Brien was sent in to do. In the housing department, he missed all the targets. He was sent into climate department knowing that this is what he does best, is miss our targets, and has now put up the white flag. It's a scandal whenever Micheál Martin was in COP saying we need to meet our targets, we need to tell the truth. All this rhetoric for an international audience, and they were abandoning the question of climate change in this country. Finally, very, very briefly, I think there's very important questions to be asked this week about whether the Irish public paid a sweetener of €10 million to the World Bank so that Paschal Donohoe could get a €600,000 job. It seems incredible that an extra €10 million was given, paid not by the Irish government, not by Paschal Donohoe, paid by the public, above what the World Bank was requesting, when the government, the advice that they received from senior civil servants was that we won't get any reputational benefit if we give any extra money, and yet nonetheless, this is when the job, Paschal Donohoe's job, is beginning to become available. The government decides to give 10 million euros extra to the World Bank, one of the richest institutions in the entire world. It's very important we get to the bottom of this, because it looks, you know, deeply, deeply troubling that the public would end up footing the bill for a sweetener for Paschal Donohoe to get this very lucrative job that he subsequently got.
We note that the government have decided not to accredit the Iranian ambassador, and we think it is absolutely right to protest against the violent repression of the Iranian government against protesters who are protesting in Iran against rampant inflation, against corruption, and against the repressive nature of the Iranian regime. And of course, this is the latest in a cycle of protests that have happened in Iran over women's rights, over democracy, over the repressive nature of the regime, and now added to that entirely legitimate protests about corruption and about the rampant inflation that is impacting ordinary working people. So we absolutely condemn the violent repression of the Iranian regime against its own people, call for them to lift the censorship that is making it very difficult to even know what precisely is going on the ground, but clearly to cover up some of the violent repression that they are perpetrating against their own population. However, we also want to challenge the sickening double standards and hypocrisy of our own government, of the Trump administration and of the EU, who have absolutely no role to play in making life better for the Iranian people or improving the situation. For Donald Trump to talk about violent repression of protesters when he is justifying the assassination of a mother of 3 children who was involved in protesting and is defending that, or when he has engaged in a military incursion into a sovereign country, Venezuela, or when he's threatening to invade and occupy Greenland, when he's threatening Cuba, when he's threatening Mexico. The hypocrisy of the US administration is disgusting, but we have no criticism, no forceful criticism. Immediate threats and justifiable condemnation of the Iranian regime, immediate threats of escalating sanctions, not a word about Trump's threats, nakedly imperialist threats and bullying and actual action in the case of Venezuela. It is sickening. Or the hypocrisy of our own government, where it has diluted the Occupied Territories Bill after 2 years of a genocide by Israel in Gaza, diluting the bill, and we hear actually no intention of even passing the minimal sanctions of the Occupied Territories Bill. Or even if they were concerned about the Trump administration's political manipulations in this country, where the US ambassador attends a conference of far-right actors here in Ireland over the last while, is absolutely unbelievable. So, solidarity with the people of Iran. The Iranian regime should end its violent repression of these protests, but the West should stay out of it. They have no useful role to play. They have no interest in the well-being of the people of Iran or of the wider region. And our government should end its complicity with the sickening double standards that are being displayed by both the United States and the European Union. One just quick thing I also just will be mentioning today as well is how the Minister for Housing has been exposed as misleading, seriously misleading the Irish public and the Dáil on the question of the spun out video, which was advising people who are forced, because of the failure of the government to deal with the housing crisis, who are forced to stay at home with their parents, telling them that, what they needed to do was learn how to wash the dishes and do domestic chores, where the minister denied that his department had any involvement in the production of that ridiculous promotional video, and we now discover through emails that in fact his officials had signed off on it, and it was the housing agency that had co-scripted it. So the minister needs to get up and correct the record of the Dáil and apologise for misleading the Irish public about that completely insulting and ridiculous video.
Hi, so since the Dáil broke, the world has been turned in a more brutal, violent and nakedly imperialist direction, and it seems that our government is going to stay silent and take a craven stance on that. This is something that we will be raising with the Taoiseach today, is the absolutely disgraceful position they've taken about Venezuela, where US imperialism has gone in there in a naked oil grab under dubious pretense that it's about a narco-terrorism issue, and has seized the leader and his wife. And what kind of a statement has been put out about that by the Taoiseach and Helen McEntee? Absolutely nothing to see here. In marked contrast then about Greenland, which is obviously next on Trump's sights, they all of a sudden think that the people of Greenland should decide their own fate. But they don't apply that to Venezuela, or it would seem to potentially Iran, which they seem to be backing up. Interesting that there are sanctions on Iran, none against Israel, by the EU. Israel, a country that's committed genocide for over 2 years and is still doing so right now. I want to ask, what does Micheál Martin think that this is going to achieve? Is he going to go on St. Patrick's Day and give Trump yet another opportunity? America has gone into fascism now, to be frank, with ICE unleashed on the streets, as we've seen. We should be standing with the tens of thousands of people who are protesting against Trump, not giving them a photo opportunity. So that's something that we'll definitely be building up, a campaign of not going to Washington on St. Patrick's Day. It's apparently going to be the day that Maduro will be on trial, ironically. So we should take a stance against ICE, but we should also take a stance against the foreign policy. Trump is just now free to do whatever he wants, because the EU and the West are not going to take any stance. Licking up to Donald Trump hasn't worked very well for Morado in Venezuela. She's offering him the Peace Prize. He still won't put her in charge. So I would ask what this rotten pragmatism policy is going to achieve for Micheál Martin and for the Irish government. It's not going to work. It really isn't. We have modern day slave catchers now unleashed on the streets of America, and we should be not going along with the disgusting stance of this government. Second issue is obviously the issue of Grok and tech and the sexual abuse of children and women. Women aren't safe on social media. They never have been, but now this is now another line that's been crossed. And of course children as well. We've heard stories that the woman that was killed by ICE, that they have actually been declothing her using Grok. It's absolute. We've also had an MLA who's testified at the all-party committee that she was the victim of, a fake pornographic video as well. When is the government going to take a stance on this? We've spoken several times in the Dáil about tech companies' child grooming. Radicalising men to be misogynistic, to be violent, to ignore the needs and concerns of women. And now we have this. Patrick O'Donovan came out with the statement that it wasn't X, it wasn't Grok, it was individual users. That's like the Republican defence about gun use. It's not the guns, it's just the individuals and how they use them. I think that we'd be questioning the government on that. If there's legal changes that do need to be made, which is questionable, well then they need to be made. What we're seeing is a government that's craven towards multinationals, that's craven towards tech, willing to turn a blind eye to child sexual abuse. I think a lot of organisations and individuals have now gone off X. I'm going to have to not use my account as well, X account, even though it is something that has been a source of spreading disseminating information. It's just rotten to the core right now. It's owned by somebody who's embracing fascism, who's directly intervening into countries. You could still justify that because Meta isn't any better, but now that they've gone the line of allowing an app that's going to facilitate sexual abuse and child abuse, I think that's a line that everybody should say no more. And lastly, just on the counselling notes bill, the government announced just before Christmas, or the minister announced that he was going to look into further amendments to that bill, taking on board all of the opposition to his proposal. A bill was published this week. There's no sign of a further amendment, so we need to find out, was this just like his original plan, but he is going to change it, or is he just actually, gaslighting us all? And there's going to be a campaign of pressure around that leading up to International Women's Day as well.
Okay.
I was just asking about the Minister General Callan, who brought the International Protection Bill to Cabinet this morning. Do you agree with what's being proposed there by government? And do you think changes are needed to an immigration system?
I'll take one aspect of that, which is one of the things they're proposing to do is to make it a longer period of reunification for refugees. I think this is just, and in general their approach on this bill is another example of their performative cruelty, which is about kicking those at the bottom with a view to distracting from the failures of Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, and the profiteering of those they represent, the developers, the landlords who are responsible for the housing crisis. Because if you take this particular example, right, this is not asylum seekers. These are people who have been through the asylum process and have been awarded refugee status. In other words, they're not safe. It's not safe for them to go home to somewhere like Afghanistan. And yet the government is now saying that we'll go through a process, we will find that someone is not safe to go home, but then we'll say it's perfectly fine for their children, for their family, to be in this place that we've decided is not safe for the person who has achieved and won refugee status. It's quite disgusting. It's of a piece with the lying that we saw from Simon Harris over the course of Christmas. Just lying, and it has to be called that, suggesting that asylum seekers were contributing to the demand for emergency accommodation, which is simply not the case. They're not included in that. Asylum seekers are in IPAS centres, they're not in emergency accommodation, and suggesting that some of those who are in emergency accommodation are not entitled to. If people aren't entitled to housing support, then they don't get into emergency accommodation. So I think it's vital that we call this out strongly. It's a massive act of misdirection for people away from those who are responsible for the crises that we have.
And do you think, Richard, that changes are needed to our immigration system?
Does it what?
Do you think that changes are needed to the immigration system as a whole?
No, I think the government are just leaning into a divide and conquer strategy to deflect from their failures on housing, on the cost of living, and the provision of public services. It's absolutely outrageous. They're leaning into the toxic, racist and divide and conquer policies of the Trumps and of the far right, and they'd be far better off actually acknowledging their own failure to deal with the housing crisis and to actually address that crisis, to deal with the cost of living caused by the profiteering of energy companies and of, indeed tackling the billionaire class, the Musks of this world. It's just absolutely shocking. Elon Musk, who is peddling child abuse essentially, and making profit out of it. They don't want to do anything about him, but they want to blame poor and vulnerable people who come to this country looking for refuge. It's just shocking hypocrisy.
Just a quick one from me regarding ICE. There was a report independent over the weekend about the number of undocumented Irish who are living in fear, afraid to leave their homes, and some are actually now self-deporting because they don't want to end up in a detention centre. I mean, first of all, how alarming is that? And would you like to see the government here put a stronger representation to Washington on that?
Absolutely. I mean, millions of Irish people have gone abroad, in many cases as illegal migrants, but they have then ended up making massive contributions to those countries, the United States and other countries. So we should absolutely be standing up against Trump's attempt to, scapegoat and attack migrants, whether they're Irish migrants or from other countries, in the United States. It's absolutely disgusting. Whether it's Irish migrants, always brought more. I mean, it's like, I kind of laugh at some of the far right stuff where they say, oh well, the Irish migrants were different because they contributed, but the ones coming here don't. I mean, first of all, the Irish did contribute criminals to the mafia in the United States, and they did contribute some pretty nasty people. But of course,